This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps in Discipleship pastor here at Southwood Church, and I'm with Scott Beha, our lead pastor. And we're about to dive deeper into another teaching from our Sunday series, Rise and Fall. But before we go any further, I want to make sure that if you haven't liked or subscribed to this podcast, that you go ahead and do so. That way you don't miss out on any new content. Pastor Scott, this past Sunday, you shared from 1 Samuel chapter 16, and you shared about how we needed to invite God into the decision-making process, really on the front end, rather than being the type of people who more so make the decision and then ask God to bless that decision that we've already made. You talked about how a lot of times it's not easy to trust God with those things, to trust God, to say yes to things that might be hard or difficult. How does trust really play into that decision-making process and inviting him in?
In any situation in life, for you to allow someone else to be in charge requires you to trust them, right? Like if you've ever been at a job that you didn't like and you had major issues with the boss, at the end of the day, your issue was actually a trust issue. It was, I don't actually trust their leadership. I don't trust their style. I don't trust their character, whatever it is. And so for someone else to be able to be in, this is why kids are able to, for the most part, trust their parents or allow their parents to lead and guide them unless you have bad parents that aren't trustworthy. So in any situation where we're letting someone else be in charge, there's this element of trust that has to be there. And so that's why our decision-making and allowing God to be the one to be in charge is linked to trust, because we have to be able to trust. Because when God's in charge, things get directed in a way that are counterintuitive to everyone else around, right? Like I tell a story all the time, and again, I'm sorry, this is what happens when you preach somewhere for over a decade.
Right.
I don't have another life to give you stories from.
Right.
But it's very counterintuitive for the Lord to tell me to stay at a church after calling me to preach at a church that has that's very counterintuitive. If I had been talking to anyone else, my guess is their advice would have been like, you can't stay there. How are you going to be faithful to God if he called you to preach, but you don't get to preach? How are you going to be able to? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And then what God's answer was, no, don't go anywhere. Just stay right there. Okay, I don't know how I can be faithful to your call to preach and be faithful to the call to stay. It doesn't make any sense. Of course it didn't make any sense. I didn't have all the information that God already knew. Yeah. God already had the information. And so it's that's the really difficult part of all of that is like you got to come to some sort of understanding that he really does. If you believe God is who he says he is, then you should intuitively know that he sees more and knows more than you. So therefore, he is a much better. He's in a much better position to make decisions for your life. Right. And I have this burden, and I get it. Not everyone gets it, because I can't say that it's a hard and fast rule, but I have this burden as a pastor in a place like West Virginia, where everybody, even the kids that we raise up in this place, by and large, just wants to leave. Yeah. They always want to leave. Yeah. It feels like for the last 14 years, every time we will get a great young family, they'll get involved, they'll be serving, they'll be giving. I mean, a vital part of our church. And then, hey, I got this job offer in Pittsburgh or in St. Louis or in Orlando, and we're, it's a great opportunity for our family. So we're gonna. I go, hey, if you pray about it and God said yes, then do it. You got to be faithful. But like it's so bizarre to me how often that it is always take off, take off, take the bigger pay, take the bigger city, the more like. And I go, well, that's so weird because in my own situation, he told me to stay. in the same environment. So I know that he does both. So I don't understand why. So the only thing I can come to the conclusion, I don't want to like call into question people's character, but like, how is it so consistent that everyone else feels called to leave?
Yeah.
I think that it's because a lot of times God's voice just ends up being our voice.
Yes.
And we just go, oh, I think that's God. And he goes, no, that's really what you want.
Yeah.
And you just hope that it's God. Because you didn't invite him in on the front end of it.
Yeah.
Because if you did, he might actually invite you to, hey, stay and tough it out.
Yeah.
Make the business work here. Make the relationship work. Like, you know, everything that he calls us to is so counterintuitive. Like I mentioned this in the second service on Sunday. Like, so many people just get divorced and they just go, yeah, that's just normal.
Right.
Hey, me and you, we can't get along. We're just going to split ways and find people that'll make us happy. Because, and you know what God's calling you to? Work it out.
Yeah.
Fix it.
Yeah.
Stay. Fight. And the same thing for your family. What if that job that has a bigger market or whatever is not the right place for your kids because you're taking them from a place where maybe they have a network of friends and people to support them, and you're transitioning them to somewhere else. Now, if that's God's will, he will take care of it. But if you're just pushing as the parents, hey, this is a good opportunity for our family, so we got to go. Bigger is always better. You might be putting your kids in situations that's not good for them, that might developmentally have issues where they don't have that support system. They feel lost in church, in the new church where they were really spiritually growing in one church, and you just uprooted them. Like we can't just always think, oh, if it's looks better on paper, all right, this is a bigger market, my business will grow bigger here. This is a bigger amount of pay, our family will do better here. This is a bigger city. Look at all the options for our kids and all. You can't just look at what's on paper and go, oh, that's because God has more information about what's best for you.
Yeah. So it made me remember the time I was pregnant with Esme during this time, and I'd already been feeling, Anthony and I had already had a time or a moment where like we felt like God was telling us to go, but then as soon as we said yes, it was like he told us to stay again, and we were like, what is going on? And I remember feeling during that time like, I know that I'm not supposed to stay in kids ministry forever, but I don't understand because there's not, you know, I don't see the things, but we stayed. But then my husband got a job offer, and I don't even know that I told everybody on staff about it, but my husband got a job offer in Tennessee. It was November. I was due in January with Esme, and I was like, and it seemed like on paper the ideal job for him, like the route that he wants to take in his career, much better pay. We've talked about adoption in the future, and they like even give money to help towards adoption and all these things. And we're like, oh man. And I told him, I said, look, I am too hormonal and too emotional to even think about that decision. I was like, because everything within me would say no, but if that's what God wants us to do, I don't want to stop it when we're supposed to. So we prayed, and I was like, we have to ask God to make it abundantly 100% clear one way or the other, like to close the door, if not, to open it, if it is, like, and that it would be so obvious that it would make sense. And so he ended up, the technical interview, which is usually where he thrives, he bombed it. And he was like, I don't think I'm getting a call back. I said, well, if you do, we'll know we're supposed to go, because there's no way they would want to hire you if you did that bad in the interview and they want you. Because there were questions that like he literally had to say, I don't know to. But as soon as he hung up, he said, I remembered all the answers. He was like, it was like there was a block in my brain when they're asking me these easy questions that I should know that I've done for decades. And so in that moment, it was like, well, if they call us back, we know. If they don't, we know. Like, it's okay. And I remember that, that story came to mind when you were sharing, because I was just like, man, I think that it's easy for people to look at us as pastors and think that, because obviously, like, we're doing things that we obviously really want to make sure that God is involved and that type of thing. But we need that in our other, like, the rest of our lives too. Like, if you're not in ministry, you still need that in your life as well. And you should be doing the same thing that you think a pastor should do or somebody in ministry should do.
This has been the struggle for me is, and again, this is other. I will tell you my experience with other people, so the way it doesn't sound like me like hyping myself up. There are people not associated with Southridge Church, and some that have been associated with Southridge Church, that upon hearing me preach, they'll go, Scott, what are you doing in Charleston, West Virginia, preaching to 400 people a weekend? Like, you should be preaching at a much larger scale. Like, what are you doing here? And I go, God won't let me go anywhere. This is where he wants me to be. It's that simple. It doesn't make any sense because, like, when we were hiring Jared, we were going through an outside company. These are people that have never known us whatsoever, so they got to know us. They started watching our services. This is a guy that knew people all over the country. He'd sat in, literally thousands upon thousands of church services, doing church ministry and worship leading and consulting. And he's like, Scott, what are you doing? Like, and I go, it's just, this is what God's called me to do. This happens so often in my life that sometimes I'll tell Megan, I'm like, I don't know what they mean by this. Like, there might be a gifting there that you recognize, but this is the place that God wants to use it. And it is a little counterintuitive to place someone who maybe has high leadership gifting and high, preaching and teaching ability and all of this, and place him in a community that is shrinking. That seems counterintuitive, but that's why I'm saying, if the decisions that you're making are always the ones that just make sense on paper, there's a chance that you haven't actually invited God in.
Right.
Because God the choosing of David is so counterintuitive. He was such a nobody. His own dad didn't even include him when they said, bring all your sons. He was not him.
Yeah.
Not him. Like, really?
Yeah.
It's that's what happens when God is actually in charge. Like, you think about a story like Pastor Jared being here. Who in the world would pick up from San Antonio, Texas, and come to stinking Charleston, West Virginia?
Yeah.
Unless God said that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. They've got literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of churches in Texas right there by his family, the place that he's used to. And I'm sorry, most of the country looks around and goes, West Virginia? Really?
Yeah.
The state that ranks almost lowest in everything.
And
you
then
want to
half
move
the
your
people
family
think
there?
you're talking about Virginia.
Yeah, they're like, is that close to Richmond? Like, it's so counterintuitive. That's how you know that it's God.
Yeah.
And it frustrates me that over my time here, like, the amount of people that just pop in here, things are going so good, and they're like, yeah, man, we're going to Florida.
Yeah.
We're going to Texas. We're going to, and I go, all right, that's great. If that's what God called you to do, blessings on you. But if you actually didn't include God on the front end and you just asked him to confirm what it was that you already thought was the best idea for you, and again, this is how good God is. That could be your story, and you could be thriving wherever you're at right now.
Yeah.
I get it. You could be, because that's how good God is. That you can make a misstep and he can still bless you and use you and keep you and all of this. So it's hard to just go, oh, well, then it doesn't matter if God. But, like, for me, I told that story on Sunday. I went and took an interview at a church down in Ohio, and I was personally wounded by that process because, and as someone that already deals with insecurity when you get passed over for a job, and you know the person that got the job, that will do a number on you. That will do a number on it. I could have been saved that personal harm. Look, is God blessing and thriving and all that now? Yes. I could have been saved that. So I'm not saying, hey, if you just went and you just followed whatever you thought was best, and your life is awesome right now, that's great. But I'm going to guess that you've got some scars that were unnecessary, that God actually wanted to save you from. I remember back in the day listening to Stephen Furtick preach a sermon series called God's Will is Whatever. And sometimes it is like that. Sometimes it is like you can stay or you can go and God will bless you. Absolutely. Like, sometimes doing the ways of God is far more important than the specifics. I'm not saying that's not still the case, but it concerns me to watch how people operate.
Right.
That they just like in the church, they're just like, oh yeah, we're just getting a divorce. We just can't work it out. And I'm like, man, it's so bizarre to me. Like, oh yeah. You know, we prayed about it, and we're still just going to live together. We just think that's the right choice for our family. Yeah. I'm like, gosh, I don't know who you were praying to. That like I don't. And it'll be like, oh no, is the voice of God confirm this? And I'm like, are you sure that it wasn't your voice that you, because it's what you want most? It just like I just watch stuff like that, and that's why this sermon, like I didn't think when I got to 1 Samuel 16, I've known it's coming the whole time.
Right.
The calling of David, the anointing of David is one of the most popular passages because every preacher wants to go and focus on David in the story. Oh, and they want to tell the congregation, oh, look, you're like David. You were forgotten. You were the one that's left. And as I was reading it all last week, the Lord's going, look at what Samuel's doing. Look at how he is fully submitted, listening to my voice in the decision-making process. I've never thought about Samuel in this story ever, to be honest, because I thought, look, God already made a choice. Samuel's going to do what God said. Let's focus on David. And I got completely drawn to watch what Samuel's doing. He's the one that sees the Eliab in early in that chapter, and he's like, oh, that's got to be him.
Yeah.
And sometimes we read these Bible stories like just sheerly like Bible stories, and you go, oh, what Samuel would never do that because he is in, God's in control. And he goes, well, wait a second. How many people throughout the scriptures were disobedient to God? Right? And so Samuel's not, he's not immune from that.
Yeah.
What if he had just moved on his first reaction, made Eliab king?
Right.
Like how much different everything would have been.
Oh, yeah.
Even for Samuel. Samuel would have ended up being the next Saul. Okay, Saul. Or Samuel, you don't want to listen to my voice, you're out too.
Right.
Because if you don't want to be obedient to God, God will find someone that will be obedient to him.
Yeah.
So it was so interesting to me that we ended up talking about Samuel more so than David.
Yeah.
Because, there's something cool there about David being the youngest, and yes, he points towards Jesus, but David's going to have enough time in the scriptures for us to talk about him. Like, getting decisions right is so paramount for our lives, because if you think about it, that's all we really do is make decisions for the rest of our lives.
Absolutely. And I think like the pulling out that fact about how Eliab, he seemed so much like the obvious choice, and that's what we do so much in our life is it looks obvious. Like we want what looks best. Like we like to show an image that maybe shows that, or, would show our best, or those things. And I think about all the different failures we see within the church and outside the church and things like that. And it's like, you have to start wondering, like, are people just looking at, these certain things that check a box, but not really seeing the underneath side, the stuff that we don't see, and wondering, man, like, is it because we just look and we're like, yep, that's the guy, that's the person, that's the job, that's the thing, because that's what looks right, that's what looks best, that's what checks those boxes, but not seeing all those things. Because I think that point that you brought out about how God, he operates at a level and has information that we don't have, is so necessary. I was sitting by somebody yesterday who I thought about this person for a service, because I actually had thought about this kind of thing a while back. Like, I knew about some stuff that was going on in her life, and I felt like at the moment that she had taken a job before, like that maybe she shouldn't have, but it wasn't my place to say. I knew that. But right now she's kind of in that same position of needing a job, but there's some things going on within her life, within her family, that she really needs to focus on right now. And she leaned over and she said, my husband told me this was going to step on my toes today. And I said, I thought about you earlier in the first service, because I knew, I was like, man, there's so many, like all of us, it hits all of us, but especially I think those people who are in that place where you are waiting, where you don't know what's next, where you need that job. You need to make it like there's this things you talked about how like, man, it's not easy to stay in that longer. Like it is, you want to just jump on the first opportunity, the first thing, because we look at all the, well, I have bills to pay. I have mouths to feed. I have these things to do and to take care of. And it's hard to wait in those moments and not just move quickly.
Decision making that also, that the Lord just reminded me of this. I didn't say this at all on Sunday. Why decision making like this is so difficult is because our ego is so tied up in it. Think about Samuel. If he goes, really, God, you want me to anoint David? That's going to make me look ridiculous. The youngest son that didn't even get invited, that's going to make me look ridiculous. People are going to go, I don't know if Samuel really heard from God or not, because that is a wild choice.
Yeah.
Like, nobody saw that coming. And I think that's a lot of the reason why we end up making such bad decisions is because our ego is tied up in it, and we're afraid to look foolish for the Lord.
Yeah.
We're afraid, like, for me, like, that's the battle. When people go, Scott, you know you could be preaching at a church 2 times, 3 times, 4 times the size of what you normally are, and I go, yeah. Like, that's a battle for my ego to go, like, don't tell me stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because it may look ridiculous to whatever it is, like, and that's part of, like, look throughout the scriptures, the people that were most faithful to God a lot of times looked the most foolish for him.
Yeah.
Right? Like Noah looks like an absolute crazy person building a boat. Like, what's going to happen? Oh, the Lord's going to send a flood. Like, what? What are you talking about? Yeah. He would look crazy. Like, all throughout the scriptures, people looked wild being faithful to God. And so, like, that's the other side of it is, like, we will rush in to take a job because we're too embarrassed to say, you know what, I'm waiting on the Lord here. People will settle in relationships and go, well, I guess Timmy is the best it's going to get, or you know, Barbara, that's you know, I'm getting along in life, and not many options out here left, so I guess we'll just settle for old Barb. And you go, like, because your ego's tied up into it, because you go, well, I've got to have somebody. And that's how you end up in a crap relationship. That's how you end up with a crap job. That's how people rush into buying cars and houses and boats. It's like, because your ego's tied up into it. Because you're not listening to the Lord and going, wait a second, just wait till I show you what it is. And if Samuel's ego had been tied up in it, he would have wanted to make the choice that looks like it made the most sense, Eliab. But since his ego was also submitted to the Lord, he goes, okay, even if it makes me look stupid, which it's definitely going to make me look dumb for now. Ultimately, once you see David pan out, you go, Samuel looks like a genius. But, like, in the moment, everyone watching, like, I wish that there had been some sentences added to the narrative to go, and all the other 7 brothers were like, what are you doing? Jesse even goes, you know, like, Sam, there was a reason we didn't invite him. Like, I wish we could have saw the reaction of everyone around going, I think Samuel's past his prime. I don't think that he's hearing from the Lord anymore. But we didn't get any of that, because I imagine Samuel's even, like, anoints him and walks away going, oh, Lord. I hope that that's the right choice, because there looked like there was better choices on there. But, our ego gets tied up into it. And it's like, no, I feel like I should be further along in life by this point. So I'm going to start making moves since God won't make them. And I go, that is a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe to make your spouse resent you, to make your kids hate you. That is a recipe for disaster if you want to start making moves before the Lord is ready to make those moves. Because in those moments that people say that stuff to me, I always tell myself, listen, at the moment that God wants to promote me, he'll promote me, period. That's it. That's how I feel about the way that God moves, is at the moment that he wants to promote someone, he wants to make something happen in your life, he will make that happen. And you do not this is not like, oh, just be lazy and do whatever the heck you want. Like,
Right.
No, be faithful.
And where you're at.
Where you're at.
What you're doing.
And then if he wants to move you, he'll move you. That's why, go look at the David side of this. David's just out being faithful to his father.
Yeah.
Being a good little shepherd boy, not causing any problems. He's just out being faithful. He didn't even care that he didn't get invited.
Right.
Right? He's just out being faithful. And it was while he was just being faithful that God goes, that one has a heart for me. I'll promote him. That's what it looks like. You don't have to take matters into your own hands in the way that you don't have to start moving the chess pieces. You just have to continue to play the game.
Right.
Like, you just have to stay faithful in the process, and then God will move you if that's the right thing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that is so important for us to remember and to think about, and to not let our ego in the way, because the other side of it is also making sure you're listening to God above the other voices. Because at a certain point, after hearing that so many times that you've heard, you could sit back and be like, well, maybe I'm wrong.
Maybe that's God's voice.
Maybe I should listen, because there are times where God speaks through other people to us. But it's one of those things to have to stay and trust, even though how many times you hear it, how many things other people say, to remember that their voice should not be the loudest often it seems the loudest, often it seems the most obvious, but to make sure that you're still focusing on God and his voice and what he would tell you to do over everybody else, not letting anything get in the way of that. That was early in the series that we heard that kind of stuff, and I think we're going to have to remember it and see it. We're going to see those things and some of the things that we've even talked about throughout the rest of the series. We're going to see more on David and his faithfulness and his choice to, be faithful and where he's at throughout the rest of the story. So I hope that this helps you in your faith journey, that you'll remember to bring God into the decision-making process and just learn to trust him, to be in charge of those things and to know more than you know, and to be okay waiting even when it's not easy. But we'll be right back here again next week with another podcast to help you in your faith journey.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.